We good? Excellent. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming to, I think this is only the second event we've managed to hold since the second lockdown in Bangkok. Sorry for making some of you sit as though you're about to start an exam. It'll all be marked at the end and given a grade. But we are trying to maintain some social distancing today. We're just waiting for Ajahn Titinan to come back. He'll be back in a minute, but let's just run you through what we're planning at the club over the next couple of weeks. On the 19th of February, we're launching at the club an exhibition of Ben Davies' fantastic and very atmospheric black and white photographs of, he calls it Vanishing Bangkok, of buildings and parts of the city that have either disappeared or are disappearing or likely to disappear. And these are really stunning photographs, well worth catching. He's actually published a very beautiful book, so do come along for that if you can. For those photographs will be replacing this current exhibition we have. On the 24th, we're planning to have a double book launch, two books looking at the Thai military and then relations between the Thai and, or similarities, comparisons between the Thai and Myanmar military. So each of those books will be very timely, considering the close fraternal relations between the armed forces of both countries. I don't know if many of you know, but General Min Aung Hlaing actually sent a letter to General Prayut today asking him to help sustain Burmese democracy. So there's a very unusual take on how you sustain democracy with chat between two coup leaders. On the 25th, we're also going to be looking at the cultural heritage of Thailand, and that's an event that we've got to formalise details for, but that again, put those in your diary if you can. I'm going to start off, although I'm still waiting for Ajahn Titinan to make his way back. But let's get going, because you've all been waiting patiently. We've got most of our panellists here. Last week, on Monday, I'm not sure how many people would claim to have been ready and anticipating the coup that was carried out by the Myanmar military. There have been a number of warnings that this might happen, that there have been sort of what we might call saber rattling the week before. But I think many people are looking at the way in which the military in Myanmar had overseen a transition to a democratic government and made sure that they preserved extensive powers in the country, extensive influence over the political system, and the way in which the government of Aung San Suu Kyi had defended the military over allegations of genocide against the Rohingyas. All of those seem to suggest to a lot of observers that the Myanmar military had it made. They had plenty of power, they still had a decisive say over the country, but they didn't have to take the flak for the things they did, and they had a civilian front, and that seemed to be what they'd been aiming for all those years that they planned for this transition. And so there was some confusion on Monday when they seized power, ousted the newly elected or re-elected government of Aung San Suu Kyi and the National League for Democracy in an old-fashioned coup. I think a lot of people were sitting there thinking, why have they done this? Why have they cast Myanmar back into the dark age? Why are they taking such terrible risks, particularly after an election in which there was a surprisingly large turnout in a COVID crisis, and where people very clearly expressed their preference, again, for Aung San Suu Kyi and her party, despite its many disappointments after its first 5 years in office? And I think that's a question that we're still puzzling over. The Tatmadaw in Myanmar is one of the least known military organizations, one of the most secretive in this part of the world or anywhere, and it's very hard to guess. There's a lot of speculation going on about why they did it. Was it the personal ambition of General Min Aung Hlaing? Was it a bust-up between him and Aung San Suu Kyi? We just don't know, and I'm not sure anyone can throw that much light on it. But we do have a panel tonight who I think will probably be able to make the best possible shot at giving us as much clarity as we possibly can over what's actually gone on. Anyway, I'll just introduce the panellists from left to right. Gwen Robinson is editor-at-large for the Nikkei Weekly, no stranger to us. Of course, she's president of the club, but also one of the most experienced Myanmar watchers, particularly of the last 8-9 years during Myanmar's transition. She travels extensively there and has a phenomenal set of contacts there. So she's got an intimate knowledge of how Myanmar has changed and talked extensively to the people involved in it. Lalita Han Wong is an assistant professor at the Faculty of Social Science at Kasetsat University here in Thailand and has written quite extensively about Myanmar and is going to talk to us today quite a bit about the links between the grassroots movements, the popular opposition movements in Myanmar, and the kind of influence they're now drawing from what's happened in Thailand and elsewhere in the region with this phenomenon of younger social media organized movements, which we're now seeing take place in Myanmar as well. Thitinan Sidorak, who is the head of the Institute for Security and International Studies at the Faculty of Political Science in Chulalongkorn University, again an old friend of the club, and who has a tremendous insight into the regional dynamics, which are very important in relation to what's happened in Myanmar. People may remember how much bringing Myanmar out of its isolation was part, and a very controversial part, of ASEAN's international diplomacy at the beginning of this millennium, and it's now back as a challenge for ASEAN, indeed the international community as well. How our country is supposed or best advised to respond to this dramatic seizure of power? Tony Davis, at the end, in the club, is a security consultant and analyst with Jane's Defence and covers the conflicts in Myanmar in particular in great detail, the many wars that go on around its periphery, and has a good understanding of the way in which the military functions and the way in which it sort of sees its role. And finally, and definitely not least, Thin Lay Win joins us from, I think you're in Rome, aren't you, Thin? Thin is a former board member here, a reporter for Reuters and with the Thomson Reuters Foundation, but also she founded a very important news organization that we are now relying on very heavily to give us information and video footage from Myanmar called Myanmar Now. It's a brilliant independent journalist outfit, which one of the products of the opening that was instituted a decade ago. And we've seen a lot of very courageous journalism done in the last 9 days or so. Thin also, as you will have guessed, is Burmese and, of course, has very personal observations and seeing what's happened in her country. Gwen, can I start with you, because you've covered the country for so long, and just your own thoughts about the last 9-10 days.
Thanks, Jonathan, and good evening, everyone. Looks like I drew the short straw having to go first, although there are always advantages. So looking at this incredible panel and the range of expertise here, I thought I could usefully maybe stick to just a few key points and also try to keep it short, because we do have a lot to get through, and really welcome questions at the end. So, as Jonathan noted, and in fact, if anyone has watched the BBC at all in the last week, you'd sort of wonder that Jonathan has had one wink of sleep since every time I turn the TV on. But unfortunately, every time I turn the TV on, he's just finishing. So I've seen enough, though, to know that we've had excellent analysis from him, and the other point, which I think is a big problem when it comes to media coverage, is that the tide of social media in the last week generated about Myanmar has grown to a tsunami, and for journalists it's a real problem. There have been some real moments of rumours that sound like facts. Some of them are wild things. One night everyone said Aung San Suu Kyi had been released, and there were loud roars in Yangon. Journalists were going mad trying to track that. Also, all these reports about crackdowns, disappearances, and more outlandish reports. So it has been very difficult, and I think it's one of the first really major stories in this region that is like we are completely cut off. We, due to COVID as well, no flights, and when the internet went down, I can't even think, it's probably like trying to cover North Korea. I mean, apart from there's more social media, but for a while there was a complete internet blackout, and as well, Facebook was suspended, I think a couple of other social media platforms. So that really limited the information, and it made us very reliant on some of these tweets And that has brought forth some incredible courage, not just of journalists, but just ordinary people, like putting themselves out there. And that's all good, but the information overload has, I think, slightly confused some of the reporting, probably including mine. Anyway, to come back to just a couple of the points, I thought I'd look at, there seems to be quite a lot of discussion about how planned was this whole thing. And Jonathan, you took a lot of the wind out of my sails by pointing out all the theories. So, I mean, definitely we know that it was launched by the military with a justification being that serious or grave fraud had taken place in the elections of November the 8th, and where Aung San Suu Kyi as NLD won a huge landslide, 82 or 83% of the popular vote, and the military reacted in fury, claiming electoral fraud, and used this as justification to launch a coup, saying they would restore or bring democracy. Does that sound familiar? We wonder how much inspiration they did derive from America, but that's another question. So this might seem an academic question because now we've got an emergency. We've got hundreds of thousands of people on the street, great fears that the military will shoot, that we could see a repeat of 1988 and 2007. There's reasons why things are a bit different now, but I'm sure other panellists will go into that. But what we've got is a much savvier, more sophisticated generation of activists, and I mean just ordinary people who are on the streets. They all have smartphones, they've all got access to information and the internet, and they've seen and been inspired by protests in Hong Kong and Thailand. You can see a lot of the tactics. The three-finger salute has been adopted right away. The techniques for organising mobs, I was still waiting to see the rubber ducks come out in Naypyidaw, but I think they're hard to buy in Myanmar. But they did manage umbrellas and plastic sheeting. So why is this important? I think it's important to understand how planned the coup was, to see, to assess in terms of how entrenched these ideas and policies and structures that we're seeing being rolled out daily by the military. I'll call it the junta. And as has been widely noted, the other curious question is, why did they do it at this time? And I think this actually relates directly to the question of whether it was spontaneous or planned. They had guaranteed 25% of parliamentary seats, which enabled them to veto constitutional changes. And of course, the key change that was wanted by the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi in the constitution was to enable her to be president, which of course she is still barred from. So the military also kept ultimate control of all security affairs. They had 3 guaranteed seats in the cabinet that dealt with all areas of security, home affairs, defence, and they did pretty well what they pleased, including the horrific atrocities we saw in Rakhine State against Rohingya Muslims in 2016 and 17, which also, incredibly, she went off to The Hague and defended. And I've got theories about that too. I think it was more a defence of her entire role as leader. If you are a leader of a country and you've got a military that's committing genocide, you either step down and say you can't rule that country, or you justify or defend it. Anyway, the military was able to buy expensive military equipment. They ran their counterinsurgency campaign as they pleased. And in recent years, we've seen Min Aung Hlaing, the commander-in-chief, increasingly receive international leaders. He's basically met them all. All the leaders you've seen go to Naypyidaw and pay homage to Aung San Suu Kyi before, and these days they have avoided her, but when they went, they all went to see the commander-in-chief also. So they seem to have it all. Why do it? Well, opinions are very divided. I really believe that the military, from day one of her first election win in 2015, was determined to take back power at some point, and that they were just waiting for the right moment and circumstances. That said, they were not in that much of a hurry because there was an accommodation. For all the reasons I just said, they were sitting quite comfortably, and she irritated them up to a point by trying to change the constitution. There was lots of things that Aung San Suu Kyi did that they didn't like, but I think what really fueled this was their genuine, believe it or not, genuine belief that the military-backed USDP party that was in charge of Myanmar up to 2015 could have won. I'm not saying a landslide, but I think they genuinely believed that they could win a reasonable amount of seats. Instead, they were utterly humiliated. I think they won 33 seats out of 476. Their immediate reaction was that it had to have been stolen from them. So that formed the basis of a lot of complaints. But these complaints were full complaints. They were accompanied by a lot of documentation, whether true or false, but they were filed as formal complaints, each complaint with lots of documents, and plus this claim by the military that the voter lists were fraudulent, 10 million names. So these were all filed, and I think what you could see tracking back to the mounting tensions in the last 2 weeks leading up to the coup, you can see the rhetoric of the military getting more and more bellicose and furious. And I think an outstanding bit of reporting that came out yesterday, I think, from Reuters, a reconstruction of the days leading up to the coup, and I really recommend it for people if you haven't seen that. I think it's free on the web. Really reconstructs those few days where there were extremely tense, hostile meetings between the military and the NLD, not between Min Aung Hlaing and Aung San Suu Kyi, who haven't met directly for a long time and refused to directly speak to each other, from what we hear, but between their representatives, which ended extremely badly and inconclusively. Those warnings were issued again and again, and fair enough, why should she back down just because some men in green threatened to take over? And she held a hard line. Possibly, though, a party's claim of election fraud, especially if it's filed formally with the Election Commission with documentation, could have been possibly acknowledged. Possibly a response such as, we're taking any complaints seriously and we'll have an investigation, could have possibly calmed things down. As it was throwing petrol on the fire when those sort of responses came, infuriated the generals even more, and when the Election Commission threw out all that said there wasn't enough substance for those complaints, I think that was probably when the pin was pulled on the bomb. In fact, a very good source with the opposition USDP told me, in fact, that this was Plan B. It was never meant to come to this, he said. Plan A was to raise objections, force a special investigation that would delay the opening of Parliament, and ultimately push the case for power sharing. This gives you a clue of what Min Aung Hlaing had in his mind, that they could win a substantial amount of seats, they would have bargaining power, and he could possibly arrange to become either power sharing, become president. Aung San Suu Kyi cannot be. She has appointed the last couple of presidents by virtue of having a vast majority in Parliament, and it's not inconceivable. And I think from all the reports of the conversations, and also I've studied his comments in the past when he was asked about his ambitions, and he would often not rule out that he wanted to be president, and a couple of times he actually said he would like to be president. So I think you can take it as a given, and the final impetus for him to take extreme action, apart from this perception of being insulted and humiliated publicly, was that he is set to retire in July, but he has already extended his 5-year term, given himself another 5 years. Some military experts believe that he could have, and I believe this is true, I think he could have extended again. Tony, I think you have a view on that too. Nobody really knows because it's not made clear. The military sets a mandatory retirement age, but the Commander-in-Chief also before was able to extend and nobody challenged him. So that could have been an option, but humiliating for a Commander-in-Chief who's already 5 years past his retirement date. Not very, I mean, it's not very respected, I think, in the eyes of the military to keep extending your term. And the other thing he could have done quite easily was become first vice president, because the military has a watertight claim on nominating one of the three top candidates that are chosen to become president and VP1 and VP2. He could have easily done that. Utterly humiliating for him also to be vice president under an Aung San Suu Kyi government. So I think those sort of things converged, and the trigger obviously was this fury about the elections. So I'd like to leave put that out. That's just my theory. I think, though, that what we're seeing now is the result of a combination of some planning, definitely since November the 8th, when they were so shocked by the results. I think there was some planning, but I do know also that in the day one, there was a kind of state administrative council, a junta set up, which was only 8 people. That's been expanded to 16, 8 civilians and 8 military. Those people were added bit by bit. The cabinet was rolled out bit by bit. And I know 2 people who were approached to be on in the cabinet and turned it down, and another couple who did join. I know at least one was approached in the after the coup, well after the coup, so midweek. And that also really tells us that they are partly making this up as they go along. But all the pronouncements of the Commander-in-Chief, I think, indicate that there's been a lot of thought in this, which unfortunately I think means that they are really dug in on this. This is not just a hissy fit that they thought, okay, we're going to take over, and then think, oh, when they see hundreds of thousands of people on the street, they might think this is a bad idea, this is going to end badly. I think what they've done is really paint themselves into a corner. Even if they wanted to step down, I think it's almost impossible face-wise, and there's any number of permutations that could come from that. So I think I will stop there and hand over to...
Thank you, Gwen. Tremendous, really, summary of all the thinking that we've had, but you've obviously had some very interesting observations from people you've been in touch with as well. Thin, I think we really want to hear from you. You are the only Burmese person on our panel. I remember so well how passionately you wrote about what it meant to you to be able to vote in the first free election in 2015, and you've had to watch all this unfolding from Italy. Let us know your thoughts.
Yeah, what a difference a few years makes, hey? 5 years ago, just a little bit over 5 years ago, and when, I, skeptical as I was of all of it, was swept away by this optimism. Hello, Gwen, hello, Kuntitinan, and everyone as well. Very nice to actually see familiar faces and hear familiar voices. I just wish it had been under better circumstances. It's been a pretty rough 10 days or so. Like Jonathan said, I was watching it all go down from Rome, and I was talking to a local journalist just the other day, and we both pretty much agreed that we're running on purely on adrenaline and anger. And I'm speaking from a position of relative privilege, because I don't have to worry about finding a safe house to stay or a different place to sleep every night, or that I'd be shot at or catch COVID-19 while protesting an illegitimate coup. I mean, this is what everyone back home in Myanmar is having to go through, having to weigh every single day, right? But as somebody who grew up in Myanmar in the 80s and the 90s, or Burma, as we call it then, I also felt, and in some ways still feeling, this horrible sense of deja vu. First when the army refused to acknowledge the election results and did what it wanted, like it had always done. I'd seen that in 1990 elections. And of course, I grew up hearing about the 1962 coup from my parents and my grandparents. And then there's another deja vu once the protests started. I remember this overwhelming feeling of optimism in 1988, that we were on the cusp of change. I was still a child, but I do remember all this feeling. And I also remember vividly seeing, teachers from my very conservative high school, and this is a high school where the kids of all the powerful families go to, these teachers in their green and white uniforms, walking past our house, joining the protests. I grew up on University Avenue too, so on the same street as, Dosu's mother. So I remember our road being blocked for months and months at a time. Parts of it were blocked for years. And then, of course, before the blockades, there was this hope. And then I remembered that hope just being just completely shattered when the army started to shoot the protesters. I remember friends and extended family members going into hiding. We start closing the gates of our house early. Everyone in the family and the household has to be home before dark. My brother and my father and the male members of our household, had started preparing these homemade weapons to protect ourselves from mobs, because we were hearing all these rumors that the prisons have been opened and the army is now using thugs and mobs, to intimidate people. It was horrible. And I also lost many years of schooling, both at high school and at the university. Now, I was extremely fortunate to have been born in a family where they could afford to send me abroad to continue my studies, but so many others didn't have the same fortune, and a whole generation was just blighted just like that. And now I see these protests and these very brave young people out on the streets, and it makes me so proud, but it also makes me so fearful, because we've seen time and again, like Gwen has said just now, like Jonathan, you've reported, the army very rarely hesitates to turn the guns on its own people. I have to admit, I have been surprised by the scale of the protests, because at first I thought that the COVID-19 restrictions meant people won't come out and that they'd be too scared to come out as well. And perhaps part of that thinking was clouded by my own experience in 1988 protests. What I hadn't counted on was the anger. But of course, when I think about it, it makes sense, right? I don't know why the army staged a coup when it already had a winning hand. Both you and Gwen has touched that on it. There's a lot of speculation and some very educated guesses, which I think will come from, my fellow panelists today. But I personally do not have any special insights. But what I do know is how people are feeling. And people feel furious, and rightly so, because it feels like we never win. Okay, let me rephrase that. We know we never win. We didn't win when the country was isolated. And now, looks what's happening when the army, we, including the international community, decided to embrace the military, hoping it's going to change its mind, its behavior. It's almost like an abusive relationship. The difference, this massive power imbalance. They hold all the weapons and all the power. And we, the people, we have to be happy with whatever little freedom that they deign to give us. And there is constant gaslighting on their actions and their intentions and our actions and our intentions and how we're feeling. I mean, I don't really know what the solution is when it looks like nothing seems to have worked. Gwen, I agree with your FT op-ed, which says that no matter how distasteful it is, the West needs to talk to the generals. And I do agree with that, but I also think there is perhaps a difference between talking and embracing. And I realize the international community will make the decisions based on their own calculations, but I do want them to understand why people are out in the street amid a pandemic and a devastating economic crisis. You know, like Jonathan said earlier, and Gwen has already repeated, we let the army have 25% of the seats. They had the key ministries. We grumble about it, sure, but they still had a lot of the power. Daw Suu went to The Hague to defend the military's conduct against the Rohingya. I mean, there are many things I disagree with her, including that decision, but well, they still want more, right? What else do you want? Again, like I said, they staged this coup in the middle of a pandemic and a devastating economic crisis. Last December, the World Bank released a note that sort of said, you know, poverty levels could increase from 22% to 27% as a result of COVID-19. Who's going to suffer from this? Ordinary people, not Min Aung Hlaing, not the army, at least not those in the upper echelons. This coup may have been staged because he felt slighted, because he does not like Daw Suu, he wants the NLD gone, whatever it is. The impact is going to be on the 50+ million people who deserve a decent life, you know, and I really worry that things are going to get a lot worse in ethnic areas, which are poorer, and in conflict zones, because don't forget, we have nearly 1/3 of a million people that are displaced internally from fighting. And we have nearly 1 million Rohingya across the border in Bangladesh who are living in these squalid camps. You know, to investors and people overseas who think this coup is just a temporary blip, I don't think so. I mean, the other day on another panel, one of the panelists, Romain, who I think many of you will know, who used to be with Brienz and partners in Myanmar, he was saying, you know, this is not going to be U Thein Sein 2.0. It's going to be a lot unstable. And I agree with him. And in fact, I'm going to add that if the international community let them get away with this, this is going to be U Thein Shui 2.0 or maybe U Thein Shui 5.0, probably a much more upgraded version and not in a good way. Because yesterday, the military sent out a request to telcos for consultation on the cybersecurity bill. It was dated February 16th. And the bill does not look good. It's going to, legalize them to order things like shutdowns, website bans, contact takedown, and interceptions. Now, I want to be clear, this isn't calling for broad economic sanctions. I agree with many who say that they only hurt the ordinary people, but I do really believe there must be a balance in there somewhere. The ICG has suggested arms embargo. Yes, please. Can we also pressure some of the governments, both regional and not regional, that still provide Myanmar with military support? And just today, Frontier Myanmar, which is another great local journalism outlet, they published an open letter from 3 women who are working in the development sector in Myanmar, asking that measures from the international community to this coup are, quote, squarely targeted at the military, but not at the people. And I think that is a good place to start. I'll end by at least hopefully on a slightly more hopeful note. The one bright spark amid all of this horribleness is this new generation, this great transformation that we are seeing in society in Myanmar today, pushed on by this new young generation, who are cutting across these old allegiances that used to be strictly aligned ethnicity and religion and race. Yes, a lot of people are calling for the release for Daw Suu and the NLD lawmakers, but many more are also calling for fundamental changes. And they're talking about taboo subjects like the Rohingya, how they deserve to live a decent life, like all of us. These are sentiments that you couldn't really express just a few weeks ago. And I just really hope that when this coup is reversed, hopefully, I'm still being hopeful, this transformation will continue and prevail. Thank you. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thanks very much, Tin. Very personal, very passionate, and very relevant. You touched, of course, on how the international community should respond. Ajahn Thitinan, your thoughts. This is a long history. We've all seen. We remember the past wrestling with how do you put pressure on Myanmar, those same questions come back again in a very different era.
Thank you, John, Jonathan, and hello to everyone. Look, I think I'll just, the post-mortem views have varied. There are a lot of Monday quarterbacking, they call it in the U.S. There's a lot of people looking back and said that this was kind of forthcoming. It was kind of predetermined. I don't buy that. I wrote a piece right afterwards. I had based on a kind of an instinct that Min Aung Hlaing is going to be in a lot of trouble. I think he's in deep trouble, and I think that they'll have a hard time holding on to power. I also want to start with just the bare facts. We overanalyze sometimes. I mean, there's all kinds of analysis, and there's a lot of surprisingly apologists for the military regime. I mean, I was surprised. The first day, within hours, you had a lot of people, chasing forward to say no sanctions, you have to deal with them. I mean, constructive engagement. If constructive engagement from 2 or 3 decades ago leads to more constructive engagement, then it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. So I think also the the power sharing agreement based on the 2008 Constitution was not static and permanent. Implicit in the power sharing agreement was that the USDP had to do better. I mean, they already got a lot. They got 3 portfolios, all security related. They got a vice presidency. I mean, the military has 2 huge conglomerates. They have a lot of power and wealth to begin with. And the USDP lost in 2015. They tolerated that. They lost even more in 2020. And basically, the bare facts comes down to Min Aung Hlaing's personal ambition and the military's corporate interests. And we can say a lot, we can analyze a lot about what compromises could have been made and how Suu Kyi should have, and she's not very popular among a lot of people, of course. You can say she should have given him the presidency, maybe make more concessions and so on. There would not have been a coup. Well, this is a naked power grab. Let's not forget, they lost the election. The Myanmar people, over 80%, they won the election by over 80%, more than even 2015. So it was a landslide. This is the popular mandate, and this is what the people wanted to say. And they rejected the USDP, and by implication, they rejected the Tatmadaw. So we can say about all the views about how they should have been accommodated, maybe they could have preempted the coup. The bottom line is that they just seized power because of ambition and interest, lost the election. And in a power sharing agreement that is dynamic and transitional, it's not static and permanent. Over time, you would expect a more civilian control of the military, right? Over time. If the military can civilianize and win more seats, gain more electoral support, that was the part of the deal, implicitly. But the USDP fared poorly. Not that NLD is great. I mean, but people still voted for the NLD. So I think we should not forget that. I think we have a lot of dim views about Aung San Suu Kyi and her micromanagement and her kind of mercurial tendencies and so on. But the bottom line is that the Myanmar people voted. The NLD won over 80% of the vote. It's a huge landslide. You don't see that in a lot of countries. And Min Aung Hlaing took power. It was a naked ambition. He wants to control, and now he's in deep trouble. I think, we will see now, I think going forward, there are 4 drivers. First, this is a very different country. You can say maybe Myanmar compared to Thailand is same, right? Military is back, same. And then now you have pro-democracy fighters against the military in the streets, same. But I think it will be same and different. I think we'll have a different outcome. In Thailand, we used to think it was same, royalist, conservative, military-backed establishment. Before it was the red shirts, yellow shirts, and now it's like the student-led movement. Same. We thought maybe different. But in Thailand so far, it's same. In Myanmar, I think it'll be same, different. First, it is a modernizing country. I mean, the rising expectations are enormous. And, we have all spent time in Myanmar in different capacities and so on. In my own experience, being there 3 months teaching, a lot of people, they have a stake in the system. And with rising expectations, you extinguish these flames. You're going to be answering to a lot of people. Modernizing economy, how are they going to run that in the military? I mean, they put in some old faces, and again, I see a lot of, sympathizers saying, well, these are old hands from the Thein Sein era and so on. Well, who else would they get? This is the best they can come up with. They have a disaster on their hands, running this kind of economy, modernizing, reforming, opening up, very complex and sophisticated economy, even at this stage. A lot of people now are younger. I mean, people are hungry for change. I mean, I think the vote on November 8th was more, not the, NLD, Aung San Suu Kyi, but it was a rejection of the military and Tatmadaw and USDP. NLD, I think that people would acknowledge in Myanmar that, they haven't done exemplary job. They've got a lot of shortcomings, but they're not going to vote for the military party, right? So I think the younger people, younger demographics, and across society, across strata now, you see the images coming out. I mean, this is not student-led. This is not monks-led. This is people-led. It's everywhere. And, in fact, I'm afraid it's going to go all the way, which means we could end up with the collapse of the government, failed state, collapse of the government. We have wide-ranging, ramifications for Thailand. A lot of instability, violence across the border. Big challenge for ASEAN, so the risks are still at this time boundless. Third, the technology, like 1988, 2007, I was talking to someone who said, in 1988, it took them 2 months to organize, right? Like, to get around. I mean, before they got to August, like they had to work for weeks and months. This is overnight. The kind of technology that can circumvent officialdom and authority is amazing, and we see it on a daily basis. So I mean, and finally, the international, regional, pressure. I think New Zealand already has struck the right tone. Of course, there has to be some kind of reaction to the naked seizure of power, not to say, okay, it's a fait accompli, let it be, let there be no sanctions. Of course, there has to be some reaction. I think New Zealand did the right kind of balance with the suspension of high-level contact and so on, but still not excluding dealing with people, the population. So these four factors, running a kind of country economy after 10 years of opening up, and then the younger people coming up, and also older people across the board, across society, the technology, and also the international pressure. So this regime will be very hard-pressed now to remain in power. And of course, seizing power is one thing, and keeping it is something else. So I think now we might be looking at some very dire scenarios going forward. But in this case, as in sometimes it happens that way, things might have to get worse before they can kind of clarify. I'll just come to the point about the region. If you compare Thailand, Myanmar, and you get Cambodia. So basically, this mainland Southeast Asia now is like two coups and one-party regimes, with or without election, right? So military coup in Myanmar, no election. They rejected. They betrayed the election results. Thailand, they had a coup, and then they pretended very well. They came up with a constitution. They got 33% of the seats. Myanmar 25, but they didn't have the portfolios. And then they have what the Myanmar Tatmadaw did not do. They didn't learn from the Thai military authorities. They didn't do anything with the judiciary, the election commission, all these other so-called independent agencies and bodies that oversee the political process. The Anti-Corruption Commission was another. And so in Thailand, all these agencies, together with the military and so on, they were able to kind of contrive and concoct the outcome after the poll and stay in power. So if you look at Laos, Vietnam, one-party regime, no election, no multi-party election. Cambodia, one-party regime with one-party election. Right? The opposition's been decimated. And then Thailand, coup with election, an election and coup, not recognized in election in Myanmar. And then broadly for ASEAN, I think now Singapore is the democratic standout. And I don't say that in a mocking way. I mean, they deserve to be recognized for being a democratic standout by virtue of not backsliding. By virtue of not backsliding in the last 30 years, last 20 years. at the turn of the century, it would look much more promising for Thailand, for Indonesia, and even other countries, even a little bit in Myanmar and certainly Philippines, but now it's gone the other way. So there's a kind of a resurgent authoritarianism in the region, and this is going to expose the ASEAN weakness even more. Remember when Burma Myanmar joined ASEAN in 1997, after Vietnam in 95, and before Cambodia and Laos in 99. Remember back then ASEAN had some pretty wise and kind of connected, experienced, seasoned statesmen. And that old generation with Surin Pisuwan types no longer around. So I don't know what the statement from the Brunei, very kind of plain and a bit perfunctory. They said, and then we will see also what will happen next with the ASEAN chairmanship going to Cambodia. So after the pandemic, I think ASEAN has been exposed even more for being ineffectual than for being maybe even impotent in what it's trying to do, less relevant than ever before. And maybe just a last point on the region, and which you can take your pick. You can call it a basket case or banana republic. So I call it a banana region, but you can also call it basket region. But now it will be interesting what will happen. I mean, ASEAN is divided. Already had a lot of headaches with the pandemic, South China Sea divided by China, and now with the Biden administration, already talking a lot about that, about what the Biden administration will likely do. Maybe they will emphasize human rights, democracy, elections, and so on. So now with the Myanmar crisis, ASEAN has a lot on its hand. I think that moving forward, they will try to fudge it, but I don't think that people in the leadership in the Myanmar military, the Tatmadaw, they worry too much about ASEAN. I think when they think about the outside world, they think about the US, Europe, maybe Japan. They're not going to be thinking about what ASEAN is going to say. And ASEAN did provide that window of international connection and exposure for them in the 2000s, but this time will not be like that. So the Tatmadaw is in big trouble. In particular, I think Min Aung Hlaing. But we have an interest in seeing some kind of a peaceful transition back to the democratic process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ajahn Thitinan. Difficult dilemmas for governments. This is such a shocking coup. And I think I was asked a lot about New Zealand leading the way. It's hard to take a country as small as New Zealand seriously, but actually Jacinda Ardern does have quite strong moral leadership, and I think it was probably smart for her to take the lead and leave other countries shamefaced if they don't do something similar. Ajahn Lalita, perhaps we could talk to you a little bit about having seen this remarkable movement come out of nowhere in Myanmar and the inspirations for it and the kind of way they're organising.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Gwen. And thank you, everyone. It's my first time being here as a speaker. I have to introduce myself a little bit. I'm a historian by training, but because I have to write an article a week for Matichon, which is a newspaper, which is a Thai language newspaper, about anything that's related to Myanmar. Usually it's history, but lately, because everyone in Thailand is excited about what's going on in Myanmar, so I have to oblige and I have to follow the trend by talking a lot more about politics and society in Myanmar. So basically what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to give you a few observations from my part. It's going to be quite personal. I've been in and out of Myanmar for the last 14, 15 years. So I entered Myanmar for the first time when the military government was still everywhere, and there was like military intelligence everywhere, and it was quite scary. But what's going on now is quite remarkable, what Myanmar has been through and the unfinished democratic transition that they had been through. I must say that I was quite shocked when the coup took place last week, and since then I've been extremely busy. I sympathize a lot of journalists who have to write about Myanmar these days, because it must be very, very tiring. Okay, I have a personal account that I would like to share with you, because I have quite a number of Myanmar Burmese friends. I think that it would be okay to stereotype them a little bit here. I think Myanmar people in general, particularly Burmese, I find them very emotional. They're very excitable at times. And okay, these characteristics I'm going to talk to you about, I think that they're very important in this protest, in this coup as well. So number one, they're very emotional. Number two, they're very nationalistic. And I'm saying very all the time because, to my mind, they're very nationalistic. They're very excitable. They're very emotional. And number three, and this is very interesting, it has become very important for journalists and for observers of Myanmar as well. I think Myanmar people are very much addictive to social media. I just checked out a Facebook account of Woodmon Shwe the other day, the most famous actress in the whole Myanmar. And she has like 6.5 million followers only on Facebook. I mean, we don't have that in Thailand. I think the most famous actress in Thailand must have like 2 or 3 million followers on Facebook. So literally, Facebook is synonymous to internet, to the majority of Myanmar people. I think this is very important when you talk about this coup, you talk about the ongoing protests now. You also have to think about social media as well. Okay, number one, I said Myanmar people are generally emotional. So to me, you guys have been talking about theories like, oh, you know, if the coup was planned a long time ago, or the coup was just planned a few nights before it took place and all that. For me, anything can happen, because the Myanmar military, because I think that they are emotional as well. So for me, I think that they was first disappointed with the electoral results last year, and they were just disappointed, and they started to think about what to do with the results, and then it came down to the Election Commission of Myanmar, and then when they thought about it again and again, they became very angry. This is my scenario. This is my explanation. And they felt like they have become increasingly alienated from Myanmar politics, while they always see themselves as the big brother, the big boss of Myanmar politics and Myanmar society at large. They always need to be the leader, not the follower. But when NLD came into power, the military automatically became the follower. I mean, at least in the eyes of the public. So this is not bearable. This is not tolerated whatsoever. Okay, number two, the nationalistic. I have two explanations for this. The military, the people inside the military, they think that they are patriotic, they're nationalistic, and they would be ready to ward off all external elements. They would be very happy to get rid of anything that would jeopardize the security of Myanmar, etc. And I think that they see Aung San Suu Kyi as a threat to their national security as well. But for the people who are nationalistic, Myanmar people in general, it's very important for them to get rid of the military. So here is an explanation. yeah, I've been asked endlessly by the Thai media why literally everyone in Myanmar is now on the street, why they are protesting a lot in Myanmar. And I think Thai people are excited about this news because they see such a great amount of Myanmar people who are now protesting against the military. And the reason to this is very simple, because the anti-military mentality is inside every Myanmar person. I mean, I try to stereotype, but it's almost that. All right. So that's my explanation. And for number 3, for social media, I think this is very, very important. When I was in Myanmar for the first time, there was no such thing. And it was very difficult to call home. It was difficult to log onto Hotmail at the time. It was all very difficult, and I'm sure everyone who is familiar with Myanmar can remember that and those golden years very well. But right now, the face of social media in Myanmar has changed enormously. Like I mentioned before, it is Facebook, for instance, is synonymous with internet. Everyone in Myanmar is on Facebook. Twitter, not so much, but Twitter has become very important now because there was news that Facebook was blocked the first few days of the coup. Instagram, not as popular as Facebook, but people increasingly they use Instagram now. And also TikTok. I'm not sure about TikTok because I'm not a TikTok user myself, but I would like to end my little talk today with my observation on social media in Myanmar. As I can see from the perspectives of the Thai protesters. I was at the BACC today, earlier before the talk, and surprisingly there were Myanmar flags flying around. And I've been asked by some friends here, did you see any Myanmar person during the protest at BACC? I couldn't tell, but I've been told by a friend who was there for a long time that he could see quite a number of Myanmar workers saying things in Burmese or in their languages. And yeah, I just wanted to say that this so-called milk tea alliance that you are familiar with these days, it's important and it's quite powerful. I think in a way, I have been approached quite a lot by the Thai media because Thai society in general now, they are curious about what's going on about Myanmar, especially young people, the Generation Z. I talked to a friend who is a lecturer in an American university, and she sent me news from Myanmar all the time, usually with techniques and tactics that Myanmar protesters have been using in their protests, which are quite similar to those of Thai protesters. For example, there was a translated piece of how to use the yellow bubble duck, the
rubber duck.
Yeah, the rubber duck thing in Myanmar because yesterday there was a water cannon and all that. So yeah, this so-called multi-alliances, we are learning from each other, and I think that's important. Every time I've been asked to talk about social movement and ongoing protests in Thailand, I always have to talk about the influence of social media and external influence like K-pop and yeah, so that's really my observation on what's going on now in Myanmar. If I have to finalize, I think I think that there will be more uprising to come, and it will be very, very difficult for us to predict. But as I said earlier, it's all emotional in Myanmar.
Thank you very much. A very Thai perspective there on Myanmar. Tony, the military, not just why they did it, but what effect it's going to have. The one question I think everyone's going to be asking is, are they united?
Okay. Well, let me start off by saying when you asked me to talk, it was about two things. One was the military, one was the ethnic insurgencies around the border. And I realized before I start that I'm not going to have time to do the latter, so I'm going to focus on the military itself. Looking at the Tatmadaw over the last week, and maybe even before, I've been reminded of my own experience as a journalist in Pakistan in the 1990s. And I spent quite a few years there. And in the mid-90s, there were a series of coups. Benazir Bhutto was pushed out, then Nawaz Sharif took over, Nawaz Sharif was pushed out, and then Benazir Bhutto came out, and finally she was blown up, etc., etc. And there was a joke that was making the rounds in Pakistan in the mid-90s, which is, it's less a joke than a quip. And the quip goes like this. Most countries have an army. Some armies have a country. Now, that's sort of trite, but it also, there is a kernel of something really important, and it's worth thinking about it. Most countries have an army, some armies have a country. And I think in that context, what does that mean exactly? And if you think about it, what it means is you have an army which sees itself not just as an armed force that defends the nation's borders, but rather as the embodiment of the soul of that country. It arrogates to itself the position of being, it almost has a spiritual claim to being the soul of that particular nation. And certainly in the Asian region, there are three countries which sort of fit the bill. And one of them obviously is where the quip started, namely in Pakistan. And another would be in Thailand. And without doubt, in my mind, the high point of an army that has a country is the Tatmadaw. And I think the Tatmadaw, for me, is, and it comes back to the question of nationalism, which Ajahn here spoke about. And the Tatmadaw is a unique example of extreme nationalism which has been honed by decades of blood and paranoia. And I think you need to understand the organization in this context. And if we're looking at the coup, where it came from, where it is today, and where it's going, it is incumbent on us to try and have a better understanding of who these guys are, what makes them tick, why do they do this crazy stuff, or what we regard as crazy stuff. So I'm going to talk briefly about two facets of the Tatmadaw, and then I'm going to make some very quick where's it going comments. The first element that I'd like to talk about is the Tatmadaw's perception of itself as a fighting army. This is an army which has an ethos of sacrifice, of blood and iron. It sees itself as not just a force that sits in the barracks, but a force which, since Myanmar's independence in 1948, almost immediately was thrown into war. First of all against the Karen insurgents on the edge of Yangon, then against the Communist Party of Burma, and then over the years against a whole raft of ethnic insurgents. So today, what are we talking? We're talking 17, we're talking 21 little pocket armies or groups. And the Tatmadaw has this perception of itself as the guys who have not just the guns, but the guts to hold the place together and to push it in the direction of becoming, quote, a real nation state, where there is only one armed force, it's the national armed force, and everything else comes around that. So I think if you overlook that perception the Tatmadaw has of itself, you miss something important. What I would like to say about the Tatmadaw's history, or add to what I've just said, is that the wars they've been fighting non-stop, I mean, this is the only army on planet Earth which for 7 decades has never stopped fighting. Now think about that. Any other country you can think of, any other army you can think of, okay, they go to a war, it may be a long war, it may be a short war. The Tatmadaw has been at war for 7 decades. And that does something to men's heads. And at the rank and file level, what it does is it brutalizes. And you can see this in what's been happening in very recent years, in northern Shan State since 2014, in Rakhine more recently. These are units which are taking often 20% casualties. This is, I mean, staggering stuff. So you're dealing with a force at rank and file level where they take high casualties, they have long rotations, 6 months in the field, in some cases, and morale is often low. So that's at rank and file level. And when you think about that, and then you loose these guys on the Rohingyas, well, stand well clear, because it's not going to end well. They have a certain mentality, and it's a brutal one. And then, at the officer corps level, what you have is, in my assessment, a hardening of attitudes. These are guys who do not mess around. They don't take fools lightly, or people they see as fools lightly. So that's the Tatmadaw's history and one facet of its mentality. The second one that I'd like to talk about is the way the Tatmadaw is less an army in the sense of an organized military force with different units and different support mechanisms, this, that, and the other. It's also a military caste. It's a social phenomenon as well, unto itself. And it's important to note that the Tatmadaw, in a multi-ethnic party, is overwhelmingly Bamar from the majority race, right? It's overwhelmingly Bamar, and to that extent, it is, in the Myanmar context, an elite within an elite. The Bamar are the elite, compared to all the ethnics around the periphery, and the Tatmadaw is an elite within the elite. It's also a volunteer force, despite the fact they take massive losses, despite the fact that people are deserting, units are woefully undermanned. Despite all that, it's still a volunteer force. So if you join the Tatmadaw, if you go through all this, there's a reason. You weren't drafted. This is not the Royal Thai Army where most of the troops are draftees. This is a volunteer force. The other point that's worth making with regard to this caste is to look at the officer corps, and particularly the top of the officer corps. And what you see here is basically a band of brothers. Very, very few officers make it to the top of the officer corps without going through combat formations. So all these guys have been through the shit, excuse my French, right? And that, again, creates a solidarity, a bonding between them, that what they do together, and they do it for a reason. And finally, in terms of this caste, what you see very clearly is a distancing from the civilian population, generally speaking, and also a historical disdain for politicians and all they stand for and the corruption that goes with politics. So that is, if you like, the Tatmadaw as a caste. And when I was making some notes this afternoon before coming here, I was reminded of something. I couldn't think what it was, and then suddenly I thought, yes. It reminded me, thinking of the Tatmadaw officer caste, officer class, the officer corps, it reminded me of a movie that most of you have probably seen called A Few Good Men. Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson playing. Tom Cruise is the young military lawyer, naval lawyer. Jack Nicholson is the grizzled Marine commander under whose watch a young soldier has been brutalized to death for incompetence or whatever it was. And the climax of the movie is Cruise confronting Nicholson, Colonel Jessup in the movie, confronting him and saying to him, "You ordered this, didn't you? This was you." And Colonel Nathan Jessup, his reply is worth actually reading because it says a lot. And the reply, which some of you can probably remember, is this: "We live in a world that has walls, and those walls have to be defended by men that have guns. Who's going to do this? You? I have a greater responsibility than you can possibly fathom." And then he goes on, "We use words like honor, code, loyalty. We use these words as the backbone of a life spent defending something. You use them as a punchline." And that really encapsulates the sort of attitude that is very prevalent, I believe, in the Tatmadaw officer corps. And the difference, of course, is that in the movie, Jessup is one rogue officer. In the Tatmadaw, you're talking a whole officer corps with very much those same attitudes. Finally, and briefly, the other part, or the other facet of the Tatmadaw which is worth talking about is, of course, their economic interests, and that's been alluded to by, I think, all the other speakers tonight, so I'm not going to go into any details. We know that this armed force has amassed to itself huge economic prerogatives and wealth, and clearly that influences how they think. So I'm not trying to portray here a group of lean, mean, honorable men. We know that the Tatmadaw is a profoundly corrupt organization. I was listening to Kevin Rudd on YouTube the other evening talking about the Tatmadaw after the coup. And Mr. Rudd said they are ultimately a corrupt conglomerate. And that's true, except for the word ultimately, where I would disagree with him. Corrupt conglomerate, yes. But ultimately, no. Ultimately, there's a lot of other elements that go into the Tatmadaw psyche, and some of them I've tried to suggest to you this evening. So, in conclusion, where's this going? And these are bullet points. 1, it is highly unlikely, in my opinion, that we're going to see the Tatmadaw splitting, whatever that might mean, right? So there have been cases today or yesterday where a group of police joined the demonstrators. Well, we saw something quite similar in Bangkok in 2010, right? The police were anything but loyal. Ultimately, the army went in, that's the Royal Thai Army, went in and did the job. 2, the region, and Ajahn Tishinam won't thank me for this, but in my assessment, the region needs the Tatmadaw, because the Tatmadaw is, at the end of the day, or at the end of 7 decades, it is the only institution in Myanmar that can hold this place together. If the Tatmadaw go back to the barracks or disappear tomorrow, you have a failed state such as we've never seen. This makes Afghanistan look pretty tame, right? So the region, and particularly Thailand, China as well, India, but particularly Thailand for the reasons that Ajahn Thitinan mentioned, needs the Tatmadaw. Finally, I don't believe that power sharing is going to happen. I don't think it's a realistic scenario that pressure is laid on them. They realize, oh, this is really, it's not going so well. We thought we could get away with it, and they keep coming at us. So, okay, wheel the lady back in, and let's do a bit of a deal. Let's see if we can go back to 2015. In my assessment, that is fantasy. That's not going to happen. Somehow, the Tatmadaw, I believe, is going to organize this thing such that they can hold onto what they see as their prerogatives. All of that is taking place in totally uncharted territories. We've never been here before. We're not going to come back and be here again. This is new for everybody. So where's it going? As every journalist has it in his or her arsenal at the end of the article. You haven't a clue what's happening, so it remains to be seen. So thank you.
A phrase we're never allowed to use. Thank you, Tony. You're not Father Christmas delivering good news for people. But
I just want to say one thing, just one thing. Tony heard me say this before. So we differ on the possibility that, I'm not saying the possibility that at some point there could be some soldiers turning, but I will just say I'm old enough to have been standing on EDSA in Manila, or actually in Camp Aguinaldo in 1986 in Manila, and there were a bunch of military with tanks ordered to fire on people, and they turned, and it took a few to turn on the EDSA Boulevard, and then they all turned, and that's what you got when you got people's power. So we've seen it before. I take your point about the hardened nature of the Tatmadaw.
Yeah,
so.
let me answer that point, Gwen. I mean, it's a good point, and it's a valuable point. Is it possible that police might turn? Yes, it is. It happened. 40 or 50 of them did so in Kaya State earlier today or yesterday, I don't recall. Anyway, that's a possibility. My concern is that if that becomes anything approaching a trend, that will accelerate the army moving in. Up until now, all we've seen is police in very well-ordered lines. So at the front, you've just got guys talking, and then you've got a line of guys with shields, and then at the back, you've got a line of guys, not with machine guns, but shotguns, right? It's all very well organized, and it's police. And that sends a message. It's a good message. If the police become unreliable, they will be withdrawn. And the guys that will be sent in, with due respect to EDSA, these are going to be guys from the 22nd Light Infantry Division whose lives have been spent mostly shooting or planning to shoot Karens, right? And they will not be taking prisoners. It will be very, very unpleasant. So, yeah, I don't believe that the army is going to break, because if it does, if the Tatmadaw somehow disintegrates, and I can't see how that would happen, but if it does, then, as I said, it becomes a real scheissfest.
Jay.
Well, this is very provocative. I think there are two issues with that. Just building up on Gwen. I mean, one is that it's untrue. There are cases of military reformers that can come out of situations like this with enough pressure. I do agree that Tatmadaw is the strongest institution in Myanmar, just as in Thailand. You have the military, the monarchy. But, it's also, secondly, it's morally unacceptable kind of argument. It's, you say, we have to let the Tatmadaw rule the place because there's no other institutions that can do it. So it becomes a catch-22 because all the other institutions, they never had a chance to do it. Right. So in Thailand,
I'm not advocating this. I'm not saying this is a wonderful thing that should happen. What I'm saying is I believe when you look at the region, when you look at governments around the region, this is what will happen.
Yeah, okay. I mean, look, I think, here, you have political parties, they never really had a chance to rule continuously. So you have the traditional institutions are the strongest. You look at other countries when they have democratic transitions and military withdrawals. In fact, if you look at the literature, you can see, Turkey would be another country where the military sees itself as a guardian of the state. Thailand would be one. Tatmadaw would be one. But in other cases, like in South Korea, Taiwan, for example, there have been successful military withdrawals and democratic transitions. So I think it's not static, it's quite untrue, because there are cases that transitions can happen and can consolidate. They can move on. The Defense Services Academy is very tight. Of course, the DSA, and then, I'm sure Min Aung Hlaing would have known that he has support behind him. But with enough pressure, that's where cracks begin.
Thin, I was watching you nodding your head and listening to these descriptions here. What's your own thought on this?
I agree with both, and I'm not hedging my bets there. I do agree with both on certain aspects. I do believe, yes, the army is very hierarchical. It has always been done in a way where you follow the orders. And that's very well established. There are people like Tony who have done so much more research on the Tatmadaw than I do. But I'm also hoping that in the last 10 years, not the upper echelons of the Tatmadaw, but some of the other people, maybe the mid-levels or the foot soldiers, they haven't really benefited, not in the same way. And perhaps they've also experienced what it feels like to not be the governing force, to not always be the bad guy. And I'm hoping that if there's enough of them might see that what is going on is really not acceptable, something could happen. I am a bit pessimistic, though, I have to admit, but you can still be hopeful.
Look, is anyone gagging to ask a question? Because we've got a microphone up there, and we should let the audience who've sat with us very patiently, there's a tremendous amount of detail here. Jeff?
Yes, I will. The point Tony has just raised about the Tatmadaw is precisely the reason why Western countries should consider engagement with the Tatmadaw in the hope of implanting in the minds of some of them kernels of thought about human rights and democracy, but that's not my question. My question is, Tony, the Tatmadaw coup on September 18, 1988, that ended the influence of Ne Win, does this coup mean that Tan Shui's influence is gone? Or did he give this coup the nod?
The million-dollar question.
That's a really tough question. Thank you, Jeff, for being the only guy in the room who put me on the spot. The short answer is I don't know. Do I believe that Tan Shui continues to exert significant influence over Min Aung Hlaing and the upper echelons of the Tatmadaw? Yes, absolutely. Would they or would he have trotted off to see the old man before going along with this game? I do not know. If you told me it were the case, I would not be in the least bit surprised. But at the same time, he's not getting any younger, and these are guys who are sort of on the political front line when it comes to dealing with the NLD and the lady. So I don't know, Jeff. Entirely possible, but if it were the case, I wouldn't be surprised the other way around, vice versa.
Can I just add to that? It's a great question, but I think, actually what we're saying, I'm pretty sure that there would have been some kind of either consultation or, by all reports, as Tony says, not only is he not getting any younger, but the guy who was there in the 80s, he's very decrepit, and we're not sure. I mean, you've heard a lot of rumours, and there have been occasional photos. I saw one that he looked on his last legs, but he's still, and you hear reports, I don't think it was quite Xi Jinping, but senior Chinese delegations who visit Myanmar have, gone as a courtesy to go and see him, and certain other reports. The point to, I think, remember is that this whole thing we're seeing, the whole 2008 constitution, the release of Aung San Suu Kyi, the election that she won in, I think this is all planned out by Tan Shui originally. I think it's all a script, and one thing went wrong, which is, I think, President Thein Sein, who was his nominee and picked because he was such a mild-mannered, grey-looking little man as compared to Shui Man, who was the guy who thought he would get it. Sorry, I don't want to get too detailed, but Thein Sein became president and went further than Tan Shui ever intended. It was agreed that they would release Aung San Suu Kyi. They knew, the generals knew they had to release her to unlock the flow of Western investment, I think. But actually, once he had released her, he started reforming, and one reform led to another. His mission, I think he was told to engage the West, get their largesse, keep her neutered by this constitution that prevented her from getting any real political power. And they thought they just had her, and that was all his scheme, I'm sure. And then when she outfoxed them, won the election, created this position of state councillor, and the world suddenly recognised her as the leader, and she even gave a briefing at the beginning saying, I will appoint, the president will be my, I will give orders to the president. The generals hated that, and I think it was from then. That's why I said, I think from that 2015 election, they probably... And Tan Shui, by the way, I think was also not very happy with the way things went under Thein Sein, because it really did empower her and start the whole NLD reformist juggernaut, which has led to... And this is a get-even coup. I think it goes back to get even. All right, we're putting you all back in the box. Anyway, sorry.
Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Natty. I'm currently running my own page called Natty in Myanmar. So I have two questions. The first one regarding to the first question. Recently we see Dr. Ne Somong, which is Tan Shui's son-in-law, also came out and raised the three fingers as well. So what would be the implications for this? And the second question would be, what would be your suggestions for the protesters to move forward to actually make an impact? Because people have been saying that what they have been doing have not really made an impact. Of course, they've made sensation around the world, how they have been so creative in terms of going out and protest. But then some people also say that it's not really creating an impact. So what would be your suggestions on this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think it's also Tan Shui's grandson who's been out showing signs of support, but I'm not sure anybody knows what to read into that.
Tin might have a view on
Tin, you have a view on that? You see Tan Shui's relatives coming out, apparently backing the protests.
Not necessarily a view. I was just agreeing with you that yes, both the son-in-law and the grandson were out, and the grandson was not only out, was also commenting on other people's selfies and pictures, doing the emojis, giving them support, etc. But yeah, I don't think we can read very much into it. They might just be doing it because it looks good. They might get, really bad, blowback if something changes and if they're not part of it. Who knows? Just very briefly, I guess one thing that's not necessarily just protest, but to respond to Natty's question, I think the civil disobedience movement is really important. That's the impression I'm getting when I'm speaking to, friends and experts who are experts on constitutional law and stuff, because as long as the civil disobedience movement continues and it makes it really difficult for the military to govern, that also sort of pushes the international community to not recognize the military as the legitimate government. And that has a lot of practical impacts, not just in terms of emotional or what people see, in terms of getting access to the Myanmar government's account in the US Federal Reserve, for example, or being able to send representatives to the UN. So, protests are great. That gives, shows the world what's happening. But I think we also need to remember the civil disobedience movement. And in some ways that perhaps has quite a lot of legs and can still go on for quite some time.
Thanks very much. Has anyone else got some advice to offer the protesters? Lalita.
I don't know exactly what to do. If I knew, I would tell the people at BSCC what to do and how to defeat this Thai government. But I think in terms of Myanmar, strikes will have to be continued. But it has to be very big and it has to be nationwide. It has to be simultaneous. It has to be done simultaneously. And I'm sure that this would greatly disrupt not just the government but the military as well.
I just want to pick up on a question that's been given to us online from Thomson Chow, who's the former Myanmar Times chief reporter, who I think a lot of us had dealings with. And he's asked the question about the business community and how quickly the Chamber of Commerce in Myanmar and the various tycoons greeted the coup leaders, and wondering whether they're not worried about both the domestic backlash and I suppose to some degree the international one, damage to their brands. You know, he's a bit surprised that the business community seems to be going along with this coup. I don't know if anyone else is. I mean, do you have a view on that, Gwen?
Well, yeah, working for Nikkei as I do, and a lot of the contact I had last week with people straight after the coup and during the week was with business. And I actually have to say I was really struck. I mean, there is a bit of a division amongst business, but I was really struck by how many of the larger Burmese, homegrown business people actually said to me that they possibly think they'll be better off under a military regime. And that really, I found that extraordinary. But it did turn out a lot, when you ask why, a lot of, particularly some local business and even some foreign, sort of complained that under the NLD, I mean, they were going crazy with long delays, promises that never went anywhere, reports that never came, licenses that never transpired. I mean, the government, the NLD has got its act together now, and reforms were really beginning to accelerate in the last year and a half. But I must say, those first few years were really, really difficult for business. And you can see in foreign investment figures, with all the goodwill in the world, in the first couple of years of that administration, they lost, foreign investment went down quite a lot, despite everyone saying they would, Aung San Suu Kyi's in power. And I think business was a bit disillusioned, and it was just coming back. But yeah, that's the sentiment I got, and I was really surprised. When I said, aren't you scared of sanctions? The foreigners definitely are, and we've seen an exodus. I mean, the biggest foreign investment, one of the single biggest foreign investments in Myanmar was Kirin Holdings, the Japanese company in Myanmar Beer. They own the majority stake of Myanmar Beer. Myanmar's most, I think it's possibly the most profitable company. It's definitely one of the big ones. And they pulled out and announced very clearly that that they could no longer work with that, and cited the human rights concerns and other things of being partner with the Tatmadaw. And then a couple of others have followed suit. Even Thailand's own Amata has suspended plans for a massive industrial park there. So it's coming to bear that what people feared was that, even if Western countries don't put on sanctions, I think the reputational damage, as Thompson himself has pointed out in a couple of excellent webinars, but the reputational damage for Western companies, I think, is too great. You might see, despite whether there's sanctions or not, I think companies with shareholders, and particularly active shareholders, will actually not want to deal with the issues raised by being heavily invested in Myanmar, I think. So it might start its own. But meanwhile, local business, I think, feels quite cushioned because of the huge Chinese interest in, and a lot of Chinese investment has poured in. And it's not just China. As one businessman said to me, there are many other countries that have taken an interest in Myanmar. I think they were counting on the Thais, and that must have shocked them that Amata has responded badly. But anyway, so it's something to keep in mind. As I said, I was really surprised that people thought anyone could be better off under this kind of military regime, but anyway.
It's not uncommon and not unnatural for business to side with order and stability. It's the first impulse, so it's unsurprising to me. In 1991, we had a coup in Thailand, 2006, 2014. Each time you can see the business will go with stability and order. Only when there's a tipping point, or when the tide starts to turn, they can flip, and that takes a lot. They flipped in 1992, April and May, in Thailand. So I think in Myanmar for now, as long as Tatmadaw is entrenched and ensconced in power, they will stay with stability and order. Some will kind of hold back a bit, maybe some will withdraw, but overall they're not going to side with the three finger salute until the tide changes. I just wanted just a little bit about a good question about the generational dynamic. You know, the three fingers and then the grandchildren. If you look at the generational dynamics, it's phenomenal. I'm just not sure if how much impact is 1 decade of opening made in Myanmar. In Thailand, the last 2 decades, you basically have the digital natives, and the Gen Y, Gen Z, the millennials, and Gen Z, and they're the bulk of this student-led protest movement. But they have not been able to broaden into the other older demographics from the old order, and therefore their movement is languishing a little bit. In Myanmar, I think that it's cross-generational. Not just the millennials and the digital natives, but beyond. I mean, just looking at the faces. So this could be really cataclysmic. It's fundamental. And then the question also said, what to do. Remember, you can protest all you want. They're not going to leave power. Not going to leave power. Normally, changes like this will come from inside, and the DSA is very tight at the moment. I don't see cracks, but you never know. You don't see it until it happens. In other countries that have had military withdrawals and democratic transitions, in some cases the military will see an enlightened self-interest to withdraw on their own terms when they can. Myanmar had a chance. I mean, Tatmadaw had a constitution, has 3 portfolios and so on, but that was not enough for them. They keep losing election, and eventually they will fear that Aung San Suu Kyi at the end of the year will change the constitution. In terms of activism, you can protest all you want, across the country, everywhere. I mean, but they won't leave. They won't leave power, and then they might respond brutally. That also has to be kept in mind. But I think the dynamics there is going to heighten the tensions and the pressure. And with enough pressure, that's where cracks happened. So I think what the protesters have to start doing in Myanmar and in Thailand, you have to start telling and putting up an alternative. If you get rid of Tatmadaw, who's going to run the country? It has to be an appealing alternative for the people, to the people at large, for business certainly. I mean, they had 5 years of NLD-led government with some earlier military reformers. They have to start to think about some kind of a coalition post-Tatmadaw if they want to expel the Tatmadaw, because a lot of people will sit on the fence, especially business, unless and until they know there will be some stability afterwards.
Can I, John, can I just add to what Ajahn Thitinan is saying, a lot of which I agree with. But I think any suggestion of the Tatmadaw being pushed out is fantastical. The hope would be, as Ajahn just said, that they see it in their enlightened self-interest slowly to withdraw. And what happened, which again you mentioned, in Korea, in Turkey, excellent examples, in Taiwan, excellent examples of that sort of enlightened withdrawal. The problem with that, and I hate to pour water on it, but the problem with that scenario is that Myanmar is still a country, if not at war, then potentially at war. And for the Tatmadaw, the core mission, every army sees itself as having a core mission, and the core mission for the Tatmadaw, in my assessment, is the centralization of power in Myanmar through a process of Burmanization. And that process is nowhere near finished. You just have to look at the map and see where the ethnic armies are, and see the continuing vibrance of ethnic unrest, not least in Rakhine with the Arakan army. And you can see that this mission is nowhere near finished. So enlightened withdrawal, it'd be great, but how realistic, I don't know.
Thanks very much. Next question, please.
Peter Trainer, I'm a club member. I've got two questions. One, Gwen just touched on. Does the fact that China supports the military mean that they don't care about sanctions or any international response, that China would take up the slack? The second question is, as a result of the coup and the protest, is there likely to be a bigger impact from COVID in terms of either infections or people illegal immigrants crossing the border to affect both Myanmar and Thailand and increase the possibility of the spread of COVID?
Thanks very much. Well, perhaps start, it's the question everyone asks, with China there, do they not have to worry about international response?
I'll make an answer very, very briefly, because I want to hear what Ajahn Thitinan and the others have to say. But for me, China's interest in Myanmar is primarily, overwhelmingly, one thing, and it's called the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor, and they want that yesterday. If they need to do business with the military to advance that agenda, they'll do it. If they need to do business with a civilian government, they'll do it. That is their primary focus. So the premise of the question that that China is backing the military, I don't agree with. They'll back anybody, any stable power or any power in Naypyidaw that can guarantee a minimum of stability in order to advance the economic corridor to the Bay of Bengal.
Any other thoughts from our panelists?
Well, there's a lot of focus on China. I'm glad China got brought up. I'd just like to make this point about the perception. I think the broad perception that China would be overjoyed that, the Tatmadaw had this coup. I think nothing could be further from that. I don't think they've got, as Tony's pointed out, they've got so much invested there, but also I think what they don't want is a failed or imploding state, and I think we all agree tonight. I don't think any of us see actually a positive outcome to all of this. In fact, that's been the really difficult thing, but I'd have to say every scenario I can possibly think of, I mean, even in the sort of an impossible scenario of kind of foreign intervention to displace, I'm just saying that's the most wild one, or the military turning and having a counter coup, or, whatever. There are two sides that are they will never reconcile, and this has brought things to a head. So it's going to be difficult whatever happens, and China does not want to be lumped as being the patron for this failing state on their doorstep. I think also China would like to fix things. And in fact, if Biden is skillful, the Chinese senior official in Beijing the other day said they would entertain the prospect of working with America. I think there could be quite a coalition of very substantial countries and Japan. If they all got together, maybe something could be worked out. But I think that's sort of a China factor that we should not underestimate. And on COVID, you are so right. I think what's happened there is this country's risking a third wave, actually. It's still fighting a second wave, but when you look at, I understand why, hundreds of thousands on the streets, they're like this. Hardly anyone, well, some protests you see, people are wearing masks because they're health workers and people, but all the health workers have walked out of state hospitals. That's leaving whole swathes of the country with little medical attention. there are a lot of young people on those protests, and as we know, COVID is not really ravaging young people, but they're all going home. A lot of Burmese live at home until they're married. I think a lot of, Thin, you might have some views on that, but I think there's a big danger that it's spreading hugely, and it is probably an equivalent enemy to the coup that people are fighting. And I think borders, that's going to make Thailand even more paranoid of the borders. I think there was still a lot of to and fro across the border, drug trade, illicit, all kinds of smuggling, as we saw sex workers coming back and across, probably bribing border guards. But in fact, I think that's really going to stop. I think they're very worried about further spread from Myanmar.
Just very briefly, sorry.
Go on, Thin, yeah.
Just to sort of echo what Tony and Gwen has said about China, but also I think, we do need to sort of give them credit that the Security Council statement, they did sign off on it. It wasn't perhaps as strong as a lot of the people would have liked it to be, but they did sign off on it, and it was pretty strong. And also, there are other countries that are still supporting Myanmar military in terms of arms and all that sort of stuff. I mean, the 2019 report, right, by the OHCHR, the Independent Fact-Finding Mission, in fact, if I remember correctly, has cited India, Russia, South Korea, and perhaps Israel as well as some of the countries that actually sells arms to the military. So, sometimes we focus too much on this one big neighbor, but there's a lot of other pressure points that I think could be pushed if the international community does want to. It's just going to take a bit more time and effort. COVID-19, yes. I have seen a lot of young people actually wearing those blue sort of, normal masks, not N95 though. I don't know, when you are sort of pushed, so tightly packed, I don't know how bad or good it is going to be. The healthcare system, public healthcare system was threadbare even before COVID-19 hit. So there is a lot of concern that there is going to be another big, massive wave. Hopefully not, but yeah, it's very possible.
Thanks, Thin. Jay?
I agree with Tony. I mean, the coup has been a spanner in the works for China, right? You look at the resolution language, they're not jumping for joy at the coup, at the specter was coming afterwards. So for China, I mean, I think that they had Myanmar figured out. I mean, it was set. They had the geostrategic Belt and Road. They got the Belt, the Road. They got the 6 corridors, the CMEC in Myanmar, and the SICPEC through Thailand. The China-Myanmar Economic Corridor and the China-Indochina Economic Corridor, Peninsula Economic Corridor, and they operated along these lines. And suddenly they have this shock from the coup, and you can see the UN language, the resolution language, that it's very unpleasant and inconvenient for China. But compared to the other major powers, they will deal with it. They will be able to deal with it. I think this is an opportunity that if you're looking for like ways forward and some kind of ways to resolve this crisis, and the COVID infections can only go up, can only expand, and that will compound what is already a crisis and the pressure on the regime. And if there's a collapse, it will just be a humanitarian disaster nationwide. But the window of collaboration between U.S. China, I think, if the right people are, get in a room and discuss and come up with something, this is the right kind of modality to enforce a compromise solution of some kind.
Last question, please.
My name is Ravin. I'm a student of international relations. My question's slightly connected back to what was just asked. So if China, and to some extent if Russia, are going to support the Tatmadaw in some way or the other because they can carry forward business, what is the West going to do then? If not sanctions or if not constructive engagement, what should they work on next? What do you think they should do?
It's the old sanctions question.
Yeah, I mean, you're quite right about China and Russia, and particularly Russia, right? Which really doesn't give a damn except selling a lot of weapons which the Tatmadaw need. On the West, the way I look at it is perhaps not well grounded in reality. I'm not an economist, but I think you have to have two things come together. One, sanctions that are targeted and specifically against companies in or associated with the two military conglomerates, right? So the sanctions need to be very targeted. So you need lists, effectively, and it's out there on the internet. You can go to the company registration, Myanmar company registration on the internet, and you can see who are the board members of these companies. And there are many of them. There are hundreds of them, right? So if you start adding up board members, their wives, their kids, are their kids studying? Where are the kids studying? Are they in America? Are they in Australia? What's going on here, right? So if you get to that degree of granularity and targeting, there may be some hope. The other thing is, what does the international community or the West mean? And again, this is where perhaps I lose contact with diplomatic reality, but to me, what that should mean, if you want to have any impact, two groups. One is Five Eyes, right? I'm sure we're all familiar with Five Eyes, the Anglo-Saxon club, right? Plus the EU. Now, if you can get a consensus around those two groups of how we, in a concerted manner, apply targeted sanctions with anybody else who wants to join in, free to join in.
I think it would be useful to tell people what Five Eyes is.
Sorry, Five Eyes is the it's an intelligence sharing organization, but what it means is the Anglo-Saxon club. US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, the Anglo-Saxon club. So you put that club together, and those are significant economies, despite John's scathing remarks about New Zealand earlier. You put them together with the EU, and you have a powerful economic bloc. But that sort of targeting and that sort of coordination is hard work. And I'm not a diplomat and I'm not an economist. I don't know if it's realistic. But if you can bring that to bear, then maybe you can make life so unpleasant, not just in the Tatmadaw conglomerates, but for so many other people around them. In other words, the Myanmar elite. Let's call it the top 5%, right? So little Maung Maung was planning to go and study at the Australian National University. He ain't going anymore, right? I mean, if you bring that sort of pressure to bear, that's going to have an impact. But as I say, I don't know if it's realistic.
Jay.
Well, sanctions are about raising the cost. Right? So I think sanctions regime now is so tried and tested. There are a lot of low-hanging fruits. It's pretty well known, different recipes, but as Tony said, there are different targeted sanctions that you can impose and apply, and it's pretty well known. But I think that the Tatmadaw would have thought this out. I'm sure that they would be hunkering down and be willing to absorb all kinds of pushback, sanctions and pressure and protests and so on. So I do think that it's a matter of increasing the cost and piling on the pressure, but still I think that the change will come from within.
Thanks very much. I'm going to wrap it up there, but thank you all for bearing with us. It was a long but really varied contribution for our 5 guests, and thank you to Gwen, Ajahn Lalita, Ajahn Thitinan, to Tony Davis, and particularly to Thin Lei Win in, I presume, rather cold Italy. Thank you very much, Thin.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you. Good to see you.
Can we have a panel photo?
Ajahn, you must give me his I have, yours I don't.